Weigel,
Present.
Representative Winter,
Here.
Chairman Eklund.
Here,
Thank you.
welcome everybody to our Tuesday morning ag meeting. What is the date? The 30th? I believe it is, January 31st. Okay, about used up the month. The first bill for our consideration is House Bill 95. We started into that and if you could do a quick recap of the bill before we start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Ag Committee, Rachel Rodriguez Williams with House District 50. And this morning I represent to you House Bill 95 titled Working Animal Protection Act. Essentially, this bill helps solve the problem of the deterioration of our Western heritage. This legislation is intended to protect legal, law-abiding animal enterprise from the animal rights extremist agenda. Specifically, these groups have found it easier to promote their agenda at the municipal level. Local bans on working animal industries destroy animal ownership, job opportunities, and revenue that animal exhibitors, carriage companies, and others, such as rodeo, bring to the state for all citizens to enjoy. Furthermore, they local bans on working animals deny families access to opportunities to view or interact with animals just because it doesn't align with their certain ideology. Mr. Chairman, this bill does not take away local control. It prohibits banning lawful businesses that use working animals. And I'm specifically talking about events that are really valuable and that promote our Western heritage in the state of Wyoming, such as buck and horse sales, rodeos, small animal exhibits, 4-H events, FFA events that all take place within city limits. Furthermore, this bill does not remove local public health and safety laws that are in place or that municipalities and counties can put in place. This bill specifically proactively protects agritourism. And I would stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions, committee? Yes, Representative Conrad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Rodriguez Williams, I had heard of an instance, I think generally somewhere in your part, where there was an issue of another group, specifically the Stampede, trying to promote, remove rather, the ability for you to, or them in that general area to continue the promotion of the Stampede, et cetera, so forth.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Conrad, yes. If you frequent the Cody Stampede Rodeo, I'm from Park County, and walk downtown anywhere during that week, animal rights activists will be about and walking around and hand out pamphlets to tourists and locals, encouraging people to not attend the rodeo, specifically citing animal cruelty. I can tell you that in my hometown, our rodeo grounds is within city limits, and it's not the only rodeo ground that is within city limits within the state of Wyoming. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Rodriguez Williams. So I know we got into this a little bit last time, but as far as the exemptions, which are on page that exempt out the different animals, page 3 at the top, lines 2 through 4, and page 4, lines 12 through 14. Do you think, I'm a little bit worried about the exemptions, and I know we talked about it briefly last time before we ran into the deadline. I mean, do you think it hurts the substance of your bill if we were to take those out and say to just leave the definition as working animal, or is there some reason those are left in there?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo, thank you for your question. Yeah, we did briefly talk about that. this has been a learning curve for me. And as I mentioned during the last meeting, there are so many different events that are new to me that I would have never thought of including. We talked about chicken roping and such. And so some of these animals that are specifically listed in the exemption are used for 4-H projects and exhibits, FFA projects and exhibits, and specifically, rabbits, llamas. Somebody mentioned earlier that, llamas are used for pack trips and so forth. And so I would be open to the committee's pleasure on that.
Thank you. And we will, I guess while you're there, there was testimony on service animals, primarily pets. Do you have a way of addressing that as well? Or would it be addressed in this section we just talked about?
Mr. Chairman, I specifically did not bring an amendment for that.
Okay.
If the committee feels that they would like to insert that, I would be open-minded to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it affects them, but we'll find out more as we get testimony. Thank you. Further testimony on House Bill 95. Mr. Odekoven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Byron Odekoven, the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs. I looked around the room a minute ago to see if Wham was here to offer any sideboard discussion, if you will. And I appreciate the bringer of the bill commenting on public health and safety. And I presume from a city ordinance perspective that would cover. But the question we kind of bantered about last time is, I understand chickens come to town for the chicken roping, pigs come to town for the pig wrestling. Lambs coming to town for the mutton busting. I get the calves coming to town for the calf roping. I get the steers coming to town for the steer roping. The question becomes the rest of the time. Can I house my chickens for the chicken roping in town 364 days a year and use them on the 5th? As with pigs and swine, or I should say swine, goats, lambs, calves, steers, cows for cutting, horses for all the above. Does that fall under public health and public safety? So while it is not necessarily a direct concern for sheriffs and chiefs, other than attempting to enforce those ordinances and regulations in view of, a little clarity may be in order, but then again, I would bow to the discretion of the committee if it's covered under public health and public safety, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Odekoven, I would guess we could narrow it down so that it doesn't affect the city's ordinances concerning the animals and the care of them in town. I'm not sure where to insert that, but we will work on that idea.
And Mr. Chairman, we are incredibly sensitive to the idea of those events taking place and personally enjoy those events, many of those events myself. So I think it's important to kind of have that balance to make sure that our public health and safety is preserved while in preserving the integrity of the bill and the issue before us of ensuring that we don't end up with some of the groups unduly influencing some of our city councils, which may then lead to some interesting ordinance discussion prohibiting some of the events as described. So, Mr. Chairman, just a thought to ponder as we craft a little.
You go ahead and
See the
stay
bringer of the
there
bill.
as we get some assistance here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Odekoven, for your concerns. So under 18.2.117, working animal protections, under B2, B states that this section supersedes any resolution, ordinance, or policy that conflicts with this section, but shall not supersede any county zoning resolution enacted under this title, any policy relating to public health or public safety. And so my hope is that this addresses Mr. Otakovan's concerns.
Does that cover it, or do we need more?
Mr. Chairman, I bring it up in part so that you're prepared for that discussion on the floor, so that we have a clear understanding of what the intent of the bill is and the restrictions on it as well. So if you're comfortable with it being covered, Mr. Chairman, so am I.
Okay. I believe we might be. All right, more testimony. We have some, come on up, Mr. Hersig.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom Hersig, Cheyenne Frontier Days. And I'm not just completely prepared about this. I heard about this bill last night, and I was asked actually by the Calvary Group to come in and talk about this bill. Protecting Western heritage is, that's my life, right? So I'm very concerned about, the things going on in the world and protecting our heritage and being able to be in Wyoming where we do offer unique experiences, being able to ride ponies, get in the carriage, all that stuff is tremendously important to me. But I also know that whenever you start putting bills in place, there's always ramifications of that, and I think we need to make sure that we've got our bases covered. The first thing that when I saw the bill, I didn't like the exclusion part of those of the various animals. I think that, to me, if you look at that, a county fair could be disbanded because all those animals are in county fairs. So you could just essentially say we're going to ban county fairs now because those animals are excluded from this act. I think Western heritage, agriculture, rodeo, we all need to be rowing in the same direction when we have this battle going. We all need to be on the same page. We should be playing by the same rules. So I think it should be more inclusive of the agritourism animals. I've never heard that term before, so that's new to me. So that was my first concern, and I don't think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that piece was ever included in any of the other, like Oklahoma, Missouri. I don't think they had those exclusions. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, sir, no, they actually did the same thing, to my understanding, excluding and making it more inclusive and including the word agritourism to cover this.
Right, but Mr. Chairman, but they didn't exclude those classes of animals. They didn't exclude that. So the other thing that I think when you construct this bill, this is kind of a public relations bill too, right? It's kind of putting a flag in the ground and saying, this is what we stand for in Wyoming. I think one of the things that needs to be included in this bill, and I'm not sure how it interacts with our current laws, but where do we address the animals? How a city should have the right. Let me give you an example. When we had chuck wagon racing years ago, chuck wagon racing was a great event. Chuck wagon racing horses by nature, as much as they run, they're very thin looking, they're very poor looking. The public perception of what chuck wagon horses look like, that's not a great thing. And sometimes everyone has to have the right to be able, or not the right, but a municipality or somebody should be able to say, we can't do this because it is hard on animals. I don't know what things there could be coming out, talking about chicken rope and things like that, but I'm not quite sure. This thing just says public health and safety. And I think we need to be careful when we put a bill together like this, that we also care about the animals. Because we do, we all do. Everybody in this business cares about animals, and I don't know that it addresses that. And maybe our laws do, but I would really consider something in there for a public relations perspective to talk about the animals and how we're gonna make sure that they're taken care of. You know, we're all familiar with the legislation in California, and it's my belief, reading this bill, the way it's structured, it really wouldn't get at what they're doing in California. They're not banning rodeo in California. They're banning everything that you use in rodeo. Flank straps, tie downs, bats, all the stuff that is used in rodeo, they're banning it, which essentially takes rodeo away. So those are my initial thoughts. I think it's great that we want to put a flag in the ground and say, you know, this is what we stand for in Wyoming, but I just want to make sure we're doing it the right way.
Committee, yes. Representative Winter?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first thought was maybe we could include something here relative to veterinarians, that they're involved in the rodeos or any activities where the animals are being used for the events.
Mr. Chairman, through you. So at Cheyenne Frontier Days, for example, we were mandated by the PRCA to have a veterinarian on site for the rodeo performances, but we take it a little bit further than that. When we have, you know, our parade, when we do our cattle drive or horse drive, we always make sure we have a veterinarian on site for those events.
Follow up?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I agree with you. I think people around livestock, that's their livelihood, and they're not going to let them go awry if at all possible. And we have to, I think we have to make folks know or understand that, because it's so important to our livelihood, and just on a ranch or whatever, you've got to take care of them in order for them to survive. And we just need to portray that to the public, I guess. So thank you.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Representative Winter. We address it on the ranches, and I think the industry has really sufficiently addressed the safety of the animals as well. You have the veterinarians on hand. The rules have changed over the years to protect the animals as well as the human athletes. So I'm not sure we're trying to address that in the bill, but we can look at it. But my guess is you've done an adequate job as an industry.
Mr. Chairman, I think, you know, in this day and age when, I mean, we all know, or a lot of us have been watching rodeo on TV, right? And that's brought about some bigger concerns in the industry about, you know, the audience it goes to, and with social media, everything that you do, it's put out there for the world anymore. It's not, you can have an event and it might just be specific to the town of Meeteetse, Wyoming, but it gets clear across the United States, you know? So that's something rodeos never had to deal with. But now that we're on TV, well, we've dealt with, but not to the magnitude we are now. And we have all these rodeos on TV, and some of the rodeos do a great job portraying their events. Some of them are not really ag-minded people, and they don't really understand animals. And there's been some things happen on TV that don't help the sport of rodeo and don't help our Western heritage out. So, I mean, it's every step we take needs to be well thought out, because it's not just here in this room that we do this, it's going to the world. And I'm sure y'all recognize that, so.
Thank you. Any other testimony from people here in the room? I'm seeing none. We'll move to the Zoom, our virtual format. We have several people wanting to comment on the bill. Okay. Andersons, if you can hear us, go ahead and join the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and the committee members. My name is Madhu Anderson, and I have lived in Rock Springs, Wyoming, Sweetwater County for more than 10 years now. I respectfully urge you to vote no on HB 0095, this bill called Working Animal Protection Act, because this bill will prohibit local governments from regulating activities involving our working animals in the community. Like, I love animals and I have volunteered at the animal shelter for several months and years in my town. So what happened in 2018, the city of Rock Springs passed an ordinance preventing puppy mill animals from being sold in the pet stores to encourage people to adopt animals from the shelters and not buy from the pet stores. And this ordinance, this local ordinance has helped so much the animals, the homeless animals in our shelters, and even the community. We have like way more cats and adoptable cats and dogs than they have good homes. So my request is, my opinion is, this local ordinance has really helped a lot. And if this ordinance was not passed, I would be still like day and night volunteering in the shelter, and I'm exhausted trying to help these animals because we had so many dogs and cats. And I believe this work, the puppy mill animals are actually working animals because they are bred for profit for the company. So these local ordinances sometimes does really help a lot. Most of my city council members and county commissioners have lived in the county and the city for decades, and they are proud of Wyoming heritage, and they are familiar with the needs of the community and our working animals. They are in much better position to make decisions what is good and bad for their community and the working animals, considering the specific situations like traffic, the public safety, roads, road conditions, weather, etc. And so I request you to please vote no on this, because one more thing I want to add is like, the state government should not tell the city and town governments what they can and they cannot do with their working animals. Thank you for your time.
Questions, committee? Representative
Conrad.
John Conrad, go.
Chairman Nichols. Chairman Eklund. Sorry. Ms. Anderson, John, Representative Conrad here. I know that we have spoken in the past. I just want to reiterate from my perception and perspective that this bill actually is an additional protection for you in the respective community of Rock Springs, as well as other communities. I think this adds another layer of protection that ensures that your work that you do continues on. This does not detract by any means or measure, at least from my understanding of the testimony that we've heard so far, that this would do anything to detract or eliminate the respective laws, ordinances, et cetera, that are applicable within the cities and or counties or municipalities. And if I'm mistaken, please educate me, because at this point, I think it is a positive for your business and or other people who are involved in animal shelters, et cetera, providing an additional layer of protection. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mrs. Anderson?
Representative Conrad, yes, I agree with you to a certain extent, but the thing is, if I'm just focusing on this particular ordinance, which was passed in 2018, and if state would have made the laws, then this ordinance wouldn't have passed, and then we would have had way more problem at the city shelters and more burden on the shelter workers and on the city. So my community, like, I know my city council members and my county commissioners personally. They are really good people. They were born, most of them were born and raised in this community. They have an idea. They are very close to the community. They can make the best decisions for their working animals. And if this ordinance was not passed, like, seriously, we would have had way more puppy mill stores over here, and then people would not adopt animals from the shelters, and they will keep buying the animals, and then we'll have way more problems. Thank you.
Okay, committee, any other questions? I guess a response I would have is, this isn't directed at animal shelters, and most of the shelter animals are not my idea of a service animal or a rodeo animal. We can address the service animals, but and as far as the local control goes, the state always interferes when we see things within the state going awry, and things are changing. As there's an influx of other people and other ideas, much of our Western heritage gets put on hold, set aside, and the state of Wyoming is constantly interfering with local control. That argument's just hard to make anymore. But I recognize your concerns, but I, like Representative Conrad, believe this would strengthen all of this, the municipalities to continue the activities that they're used to. Thank you for your testimony. We have more testimony, Pierre. Okay, Dr. O'Toole, if you can hear me, go ahead and start in. Okay. Dr. O'Toole, thanks for joining our meeting. Welcome. We're not hearing you.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Chairman Eklund, members of the committee, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. My name is Donald O'Toole. I'm a retired veterinarian. You can probably tell from my accent, I am not originally from Wyoming. I have lived in Laramie, Wyoming for the last 33 years. And I worked for 33 years at the State Vet Lab. One of the least pleasant parts of my job, although it wasn't a major fraction, was dealing with animal abuse, neglect, cruelty. And that's why I want to talk to this bill, because I think this bill may have unanticipated consequences. So this bill is being introduced primarily to protect rodeo culture and so on. I think it will have some unanticipated consequences in that it will limit the ability of animal control sheriff's offices to deal with situations where an owner can claim this is a working animal. And I'd like to give you 2 examples, if there's time, to illustrate that. The most detailed regulations we have about animals are at the municipal level and the county level. They contain a lot of experience. I went down to our animal control folks at the Laramie Animal Shelter last week, and I asked them, were they aware of the bill? They are aware of the bill, but, and I don't know if this occurs statewide, but they cannot testify and lobby on behalf or against a bill. And that's why I'm here. So I want to give you 2 examples, if there's time, and I'll try and be brief, illustrating what can happen if someone has working animals and they can claim protection. In the Laramie ordinances, there is a statement about you cannot own, without getting permission from the city, wild animals or venomous reptiles. The venomous reptiles bit, these are, is in there because several years ago, a guy in Laramie who was living in an apartment was keeping dozens, actually the animal control folks said hundreds, and I have trouble believing he had hundreds of pit vipers. So these were working pit vipers. The man had a business, and the business involved him collecting venom from these snakes and then selling it to biological companies so that anti-venom could be raised. And I have no problem with people or with companies raising anti-venom, but I do have a problem with folks having venomous reptiles in an apartment in a city. I think that's a really bad idea. And I can anticipate somebody saying, well, there's a public safety concern here. But I can hear the person who runs that business saying, well, I keep them under confinement and I can see a law case arising. Is there time for me to give a second example, Chairman Eklund?
Please be quick and brief if you can. We've got a lot of territory to cover this morning.
I understand. Thank you, Chairman. The second example involves a local regulation that says if you're running a kennel, the kennel shall be properly enclosed. Several years ago, my colleagues and I dealt with what in my experience was the largest outbreak of canine distemper, a fatal viral disease of dogs. It's not zoonotic, it doesn't transmit to people. And I worked with Dr. Jim Logan, whom some of you may know, because these dogs were coming out of pet stores. And these dogs originated in a property where the animals were not properly fenced. Long story short, this owner who had kept these breeding dogs and was selling these dogs for about $1,000 each, did not properly fence the property. For whatever reason, he would not fence the property. And the end result was that the local authorities and the state vet, and this was in Kansas, but it was affecting Wyoming and other states, they had to go in and euthanize 1,466 dogs in order to control the disease. I can see if this bill is passed, people like that who have or running breeding operations would have a loophole. They can say, well, I don't want to go to the expense of fencing in my animals because it's expensive and I want to make a profit. So my request is, if you want to move forward with this bill, narrow the bill down. If the real concern is about rodeo horses and rodeo culture, focus on that, because I can see loopholes being created that will create problems from animal control officers around the state. And thank you for your attention. I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Doctor. And I think we'll try to work on that and narrow the bill down. That discussion has been going on. And I didn't realize that the kennel or the pet people were not allowed to lobby. Otherwise, I'd have done some phone calling probably to figure out what the concerns are. But questions, committee? Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
While we're waiting for the next person, Representative Rodriguez-Williams, do you have some ideas on how we'll narrow it down? We've talked about that a bit. We've also talked about expanding it a bit to make sure we include the county fairs. I'm not sure we can do both, but go ahead. Well, oh, wait a minute. We've got someone on. So just be thinking about that, because I'll have that question again. Hello, welcome to our committee. Can you hear us?
I sure can. I hope you can hear me. Good
Yes.
morning.
Go ahead.
Good morning. My name, Mr. Chairman and members of the Agriculture Committee, my name is Mindy Patterson. I am president of the Cavalry Group, a member-based company working to protect the rights of law-abiding animal owners and animal-related businesses nationwide. I'm testifying today in support of the Working Animal Protection Act, or HB 0095. As they say, necessity is the mother of invention. This legislation actually came about after our organization spent many years traveling all over the United States to testify in opposition to animal rights-driven legislation banning lawful businesses, lawful and inspected animal enterprise, from horse-drawn carriages, elephant rides, camel rides, pony rides, rodeo, animal exhibition at fairs, and much more. The animal rights groups are working overtime to redefine what is considered humane treatment of animals, while these groups also vilify time-tested animal husbandry practices. Every single day, legislatively, it's just this constant push at the local and state level from these well-funded animal rights organizations. And the 30,000-foot view of the animal rights agenda boils down to the removal of animal use in every facet from our American way of life. And these local bans on working animals across the US has incrementally advanced their agenda, destroying jobs, eroding our American way of life while removing animals from our lives bit by bit. So HB 0095 does not remove or alter any public health and safety laws already in place. I heard the concerns of the previous testifier, but this piece of legislation just simply disallows or prohibits an outright ban on lawful businesses at the local level. It prevents these city councils, county councils, and local political subdivisions from just banning lawful businesses that may not align with their ideology or their agenda. And this legislation does not take away any local control. It simply states that these lawful businesses can't be banned outright. So these local city council and county council bans have been pushed strictly by animal rights groups. That's where this is all coming from. And this is a preemptive piece of legislation to protect the state of Wyoming from outside special interest groups and radical animal rights extremists from banning animal enterprise, lawful, law-abiding animal owners who participate in animal exhibition, at maybe educational zoos, animals in entertainment, and animals used in transportation, such as carriage horses, and even pony rides, elephant rides, etc. These local bans destroy animal ownership, jobs, and revenue that these animal exhibitors and other companies and venues bring to your state of Wyoming. They also deny families access to animal exhibits or opportunities to view or interact with animals simply because any animal contact or animal use does not align with their animal rights beliefs. And they really push hard at the local level to get these things passed. The Working Animal Protection Act has passed, just so you know, in the state of Oklahoma and Arkansas to date. I appreciate your time and I'm open to any questions.
Questions, committee? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
We have, is that it online? Okay. I think that's all of our public comment. And I would welcome Representative Rodriguez Williams to stay put. And we're going to discuss the bill and some of the amendments we might bring to either narrow it down or expand it. So, oh, yes, Representative Allemand.
Mr. Chairman, I move to pass this bill with a few amendments.
Okay, second? Okay, discussion.
Can I read my?
Go ahead.
My amendments would be to start with on page 3, line 2, starting after the period through line 4. Then on page 4, starting at line 12, after the period through line 14. And then also, I don't know, do you think we need to take the word working out of it before all the animals, since we removed the classification of animals that are not protected?
I'm not sure. I was having trouble finding my bill, Representative. So you were on page 3, removing the second sentence, correct?
Page 3,
Okay,
starting on line 2, after the period, through line 4.
all right. Representative Crago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I might just pipe in. So Representative Allemand, just so that the secretary knows what you're talking about, usually we use the word strike. So just say strike or delete.
Okay.
You got the language, right? Just so they know exactly what you're talking about.
And then also, I think it's, this next one should be a separate amendment.
Okay, yeah, we'll work on this part first.
I'll second this.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded. So what this would do would be to make the animals in a county fair inclusive if that county fair were within city limits, which seems reasonable. As we proceed with the bill, we'll see if we can address some of the other concerns. Representative Conrad.
Chairman Eklund, I just do want to, as we're talking about amendments specifically, I do like the comment that was made earlier by testimony as it relates to the animal health. As we look at optics in this case, specifically the protection of animals and their health, I think that's an important place or position that we should take within this bill so that we're not excluding, as we talked about already on page 2, lines 11 and 12, specifically adding something, and I'd look to Representative Crago to give us some good language there as it relates to ensuring the animal's health and safety as well. I think that's important optics as we pass this bill.
Okay. Sensing we're ready to vote, we're voting on the deletion of the part on page 3, line 2 through 4. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That amendment passes. Further discussion, Representative Allemand.
Yes, sir. I would move to make another amendment, and starting on page 2, strike the word, on line 1, strike the word "a working," and after animals, animal, place an S, so it includes animals, not just animal. And on page 2, line 19, strike the word "working." And on page 3, line 10, strike the word "a work," or the words "a working," and add an S to the word "animals." And on page 4, line 6, strike the word "working" and add an S on the word "animals." And on page 1, on the title, Working Animal Protection Act, strike the word "working" and have it just as Animal Protection Act. Thank you.
Committee discussion. Representative Winter. Oh, we need a second on that. Seconded. Okay. Discussion. Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Allemand, could you explain your reasoning behind taking the word "working" out of the text?
I don't know that we can call 4-H working or FFA. And that was my biggest concern, was to protect the showing of livestock, because I'm not sure that we can classify showing cattle or sheep or rabbits as working. That was my problem with it.
Representative Winter, follow up.
Yes, but in that First Amendment, didn't we take out those other animals in the text?
Would you repeat that, please?
I was just saying, if in the First Amendment that came about, those animals were taken out of the text of the bill, is that correct? So why are we worried about them, I guess?
They were taken out so that they would be included in the bill as being protected. But like a show rabbit, in my opinion, is not working. He's sitting in the pen looking cute.
Rabbit showman would dispute that. You ought to go to a rabbit showmanship contest. Okay, Representative Conrad, we're gonna have a little difficulty with that one because we're gonna take some out of the actual title and I don't know if I've ever tried doing that.
Mr.
We
Chairman,
might get in trouble.
I withdraw the amendment.
Amendment withdrawn. Representative Conrad. So we're back on the bill,
I
not
was just going
necessarily
to ask,
discussing that.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to ask Representative Alderman to withdraw that, so thank you.
Oh. Thank you.
I read your mind.
Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, as a young man, I used to run a rabbit on a leash, take a rabbit for a walk. So they are working animals.
Okay.
But getting back to this, maybe if we, on the working animal, maybe throw in something as simple as commonly referred to as a working animal in that description, but I don't know if that would really help it or not. So just throwing that out.
Maybe not.
If not, looks like I'll just withdraw that comment and the rabbit on the leash.
Okay. Any further discussion on the bill? Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so we're clear, because the original motion made by Representative Alamand included striking language on page 4, lines 12 through 14, but I don't think we actually voted on that. But to be consistent so that the definition is the same in both the city and county provisions, I would move that we strike beginning with the word "the" on line 12 all the way through the end of line 14.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. That would clear up the language. Is everybody okay with that? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'd have found it sooner or later. Okay, any other changes you can see, Representative Craigo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So upon Representative Conrad's urging, I've put together a little bit of language that we might try and see what everybody thinks as far as an amendment. So on page 2, it would be line 13, we'd insert a new Romanet 3 and the following language. Any municipal ordinance or policy which is enacted to reasonably protect and preserve the health and safety of working animals, period. And I'll repeat that. Any municipal ordinance or policy which is enacted to reasonably protect and preserve the health and safety of working animals, period. And then similar language, but not exact, on page 3, line 22, also a new Romanet 3, because counties don't do municipal ordinance, it would just say any policy which is enacted to reasonably protect and preserve the health and safety of working animals.
Session committee.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, moved and seconded. Discussion. Representative Banks.
On page 4, there we see section C, where it says this section shall not be interpreted to amend any other Wyoming law that relates to animal care, public health, or safety. Is all of that we've just been discussing included in that? I would say that it is, but I could be wrong if I get clarification on that.
Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is not, because that's, a law is different than what we would enact as an ordinance or a county resolution. So it's 3 different levels, really: state law, county resolution, city ordinance. And so I think that's why the bill has that other language already put in there. Otherwise, we wouldn't need it.
Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask Representative Rodriguez Williams, does what we have done here as far as these amendments, does that go along with your feelings towards this bill? Will it enhance it or does it take away at all?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Winter, I think the committee is doing good work right now. And I'd also like to bring to your attention too, we do have state statute in regards to animal or cruelty to animals that is on the books.
Yes, we've worked for decades on that. Any further discussion? Representative Slagle?
Yeah, we discussed putting in exhibition at county fairs. I wonder if we need to put something in on, be on page 3, line 2, after it says exhibition, or we deleted stuff. And I don't know how we want to word it. Or exhibition, including county fairs possibly.
I am thinking we maybe have already, it will be addressed in the language that's there. And we didn't get specific with rodeo, so I don't know if we should get specific with the county fair either, Representative.
No, that works.
Okay,
If everybody else feels that's covered under exhibitions, that
yeah.
works.
We have human service, legal, hunting, agriculture, ranching, husbandry, transportation, education, competition, tourism, entertainment, or exhibition. I don't know what else there is. But county fair fits there somewhere. Go ahead, Representative Craig.
Mr. Chairman, we just have a motion on the floor, and we may want to vote on that particular amendment and then move on.
Second.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Does everybody understand the motion? And we'll get the language correct with the secretary. But it
Chairman, for clarity,
is- I don't understand the motion. Okay. Representative Crago, go ahead and strike the motion again.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on line 13, page 2, we would be adding
Yeah, we're getting too involved and not specific enough. Is everybody okay? Are we ready to vote? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Any other discussion or changes to the bill? Question has been called. We're ready for a roll call vote. Mark?
Representative Alderman,
Aye.
Representative Allred. I have his. Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Conrad,
Aye.
Representative Crago,
aye.
Representative Davis,
Aye.
Representative Slagle,
Aye.
Representative Winter,
Aye.
Chairman Eklund,
Aye.
9 ayes, 0 noes. Passes with amendment.
Thank you, committee and public. Thank you, Rachel. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 188, and Representative Winter. Proceed when you're ready, Representative Winter. This is wolf predation compensation. And we seem to be dealing with that a lot these days, or at least the west side sure is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. My name is John Winter, representative from House District 28. I present to you House Bill 0188, wolf depredation compensation. wolf depredation has become quite a problem in this state since they were approved to be introduced into the state. This bill will provide for compensation to livestock operators who are located in the predator zone, and the Department of Agriculture will administer that program. So in the predator zone, those wolves are classified as predatory animals, and thus they will be subject to this bill. As we all know, the wolf is pretty hard to come by. It's hard to harvest them, and so it has really become a problem for these livestock operators. The Department of Agriculture will enlist the expertise from the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, and they'll assist in administering and investigating claims for damages. The damage means any injury or loss to livestock inflicted by a gray wolf in an area of the state where gray wolves are classified as predatory animals. There has been appropriated $135,000 from the general fund to the Department of Agriculture for purposes of administering this program and for funding the damage compensation payments. And this program will go through January 30th, 2026. So there's about 3 years there that this bill will encompass, and we'll have to assess it at that time, I guess, in order for additional funding. So that's about all I have.
Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, could you explain how they come up with this? It seems like a very small number for a 3-year program.
Yes, Representative Davis, Mr. Chairman, this bill was, we brought this bill up about 2 years ago, and it did not pass, but we were able to get funding for Department of Agriculture to address this that year. So there was $18,000 that were returned to the general fund after the period of time that it was for the 2-year period. So we figured that this $135,000 would probably take care of it.
And I, just kind of to add to that while we're on that subject, I visited with one of the bill sponsors who's deeply affected by this and asked him, seemed like a pittance to me as well, and it is. But that was based on what's been paid out before in the previous, kind of the same program that we had. So thank you, Representative Winter. Representative Conrad.
Chairman Eklund, thank you. Representative Winters, just a quick question numerically. How many in the past 2 years, how many, I shouldn't say pieces, but more importantly, how many entities of livestock have been damaged?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Conrad, I don't have that figure. I'm sorry. Like I indicated, it seems like wolf depredation is harder to identify, and they're harder to come by as far as harvesting them. So I could find that figure for it. And we have the Game and Fish Department might have some figures on it. I'm not sure.
Representative Conrad. Follow up.
Chairman Eklund, for follow-up. Thank you, Representative Winters. My main math was primarily concerned with the low value of $135,000. If it's $5,000 a claim, 5 divided by 135,000, et cetera. I was just curious, is that claim rate going up? And more importantly, is it properly funded as we see this issue arising or getting larger and larger? That was my largest concern. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Conrad, I can't really address that, I guess, really give you a solid answer on it. But it's something that we just started doing this, and so I don't know if there's a lot of information for that right now. I know that grizzly bear, there's much more information on grizzly bear predation than there is wolf right now. That's my understanding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Representative Winters, thank you.
Representative Banks, you're good? Yeah. Any other questions? I guess some of my comments are, thanks for bringing the bill. When I first got to legislature, I talked to one of our new legislators. He was in this wolf area, and their whole work schedule changed because of it. They spent hired hands, and everybody spent time just running around trying to document wolf kills so that they could fulfill the promise of the federal government to be compensated for introducing these things back into our environment. And again, I think this is quite a pittance. The cost to the industry, the cost to everything else so exceeds this, probably ranches that exceeds this amount we're trying to get. And the cost to the wildlife too, we could probably tack on a few $100,000 to our game and fish for the loss of licenses they get, especially with the moose. Thank you for bringing the bill. Any further comments or discussion? Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, would you be okay if we raised that number, the $135,000 appropriation? Do you feel like that hurts the bill, helps the bill? Because I just sitting here, I think all of us sitting around this dais feel that that number is not near large enough to do what we're trying to do.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo, I certainly wouldn't object to it. I think it's, we tried to keep the figure down as low as we could. And so if you think it'd be good to raise it, why, I think it would enhance things over the long time. So thank you.
Representative Conrad.
I'd like to propose amendment based on what Representative Craigo has denoted, that on page 3, line 9, we increase that to $250,000.
And moved, second?
Mr. Chairman, it's your prerogative, but typically we do that at the, we have to move the bill first before we can amend it.
That was
All
a
right.
question.
Committee, what's your pleasure on the
move
bill? Okay, the bill has been moved. Thank you, because we will. We'll get to that. I'm way out of the usual process, but that's not unusual for me. Was there other public testimony before we start working this bill? Come on up, Department of Ag.
Mr. Chairman. Julie Cook, I'm Administrative Manager for the Wyoming Department of Agriculture. Director Miyamoto apologizes for not being here this morning. He asked myself and Jerry Johnson to come and answer any questions for you. I will turn it over to Jerry to answer the questions on the amount of wolf depredation that we've seen in the last couple programs that we've run.
Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jerry Johnson. I'm the Predator Coordinator for the Department of Agriculture. To answer, I'm not sure I met Mr. Davis's question or Representative Davis, on the amount of claims. There were 2 programs that have gone through on wolf depredation or wolf compensation. The first one was in 2016. That program was for $60,000. This program was when the department, or when the wolves were put back on the endangered list. And there were 11 claims on the first year, totaling almost $20,000. There were $15,000 that were allotted for that time period that were paid out. There were 24 cattle and 10 sheep in that period. In the second period, there were 5 claims totaling $10,445. At that time, the program, or the wolf, was again listed as a predatory animal. And so there were fewer claims. And there were 7 cattle and 17 sheep. And again, those were paid in full on that second period. In 2020, the legislature funded the program originally for $60,000, and then with the budget cuts, there were $40,500 allowed. The first year, there was a lot of confusion because the bill didn't pass, and people didn't realize that the program was still available, even though, there were notifications that went out. And then in the second period, there were 4 claims total for $22,270. There were 12 cattle and 17 sheep that were paid for, and then the program sunset. There were a lot of calls that came into me asking about the program, and they were concerned that the funding wouldn't be enough, and so they just never filed a claim. And most of the claims came in very late in the period, just over confusion. So this bill would help codify the programs and just allow people to understand that there would be a compensation program.
Okay, and since it allows for several years, you'd have continuity in the program as well. How much paperwork is involved for a producer that might want to get compensation with the state program?
Mr. Chairman, there are forms that are available. First, when they do have depredation, they need to have that depredation verified through Wildlife Services. That in the years past, these programs have been within 48 hours for verification. The Department of Agriculture has a contract with Wildlife Services to do the depredation. Most of the problems with depredation have happened in areas that have a Wildlife Service trapper in the area, so it's been fairly quick. I know in several areas on the eastern half of the state, there are not as many Wildlife Service trappers, and so those would come out of Casper's main office, but they have ensured that they would be able to handle those within a timely time frame. And then they need to submit verification of the animal, how many and what the value of that animal would have been at the time of the depredation through the livestock barn. And then there is just one form for them to fill out for that depredation. And then Wildlife Service has the form.
Right, thank you. Other questions? Yes, Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnson, the 48-hour notice provision, is that within 48 hours of discovery or within 48 hours of the kill?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo, it would be 48 hours within discovery. It would be hard to say, well, this calf was killed, last night at 7 o'clock. We discovered it at 7 in the morning or 5, whatever, so it would be from the time of discovery. And then, we've been, I guess, a little lenient on that, understanding that, they contact me or the Wildlife Services and they get out. They just need to contact Wildlife Services as soon as possible and then do what they can to protect, follow up that kill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Follow-up question. So this bill as drafted does not go in the green books, or that's my understanding. Is that common or normal for this particular program?
Mr. Chairman, that is how this program has run the other 2 bienniums that we have run it.
Okay, other questions? The value of the animals, is that determined on market price or lifetime of the animal? I'm curious how, there's a lot of ways they could be valued. How is that determined?
Mr. Chairman, that has historically gone with at the time of death loss. So if it was a calf, they valued it as a calf at the time. We can promulgate those rules as, however that would be best.
So a 300-pound calf would be valued differently than a 600-pounder, even though the 300-pounder didn't get to 600 pounds. Okay. That's kind of what I was curious about. Also, if it were a specialized animal, say something used in the rodeo circuit that is worth a lot more than on the pound, so I'll get to you in a minute. What would you do in that case? Say maybe a show calf or something, one of the more money was paid for than market.
Chairman Eklund, they would have to have that value, and it's the value, it's always been the value from a livestock auction barn on the time of death. So if it was, a bull or whatever, there are different values set at those livestock auction barns, but for, I understand a 4-H animal, that
It
would
is.
be maybe different.
Yeah, some of that's concerning because we've got rodeo animals that would be valued a lot higher than the barn would value them. Representative Schlegel.
Yeah, Mr. Johnson, question I had for you, you gave us the list of cattle and sheep that had been killed. Was that basically over a 3-year period that you gave us that list for?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Slagle, when I gave those periods, they were set off in time periods. So there were the 2016, there were 11 claims, and then 2017, there were 5 claims, and then in 2021, again, there were 4 claims. So those were based on per period timeframes, not as a total.
Okay, thank you. I was just trying to get an idea, number of cattle over like a 3-year period. So this money amount that we're trying to set to this bill, we could have a pretty good estimate on that is what I was aiming for. Thank you.
Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I didn't get all the numbers written down, and I'm not sure we had all the numbers. The number I'm kind of interested in is how many people called and asked about the program but didn't actually file a claim. I mean, because those numbers I think we need to build into the dollar figure as well.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo, I can remember specifically 5 different individuals calling in. And that's, there may have been a couple more. I can recall 5.
How many people received compensation?
Mr. Chairman.
Estimate is good.
There were 16 that received compensation in total. There were 11 in the first round, and that was approximately $30,000. And then in the second program, there were 4 claims, and they totaled $22,270.
Okay, thank you. Representative Alderman, oh, you're good?
It was answered.
All right, Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that the program, like you said, hasn't been fully understood. But I need to point out that too, the good state to the south of us is reintroducing these also. So there's going to be a lot of, apparently they don't understand the bordering either. So there should be probably a little more activity, I should say. So I'd like to point that out.
Further questions? Thank you. Appreciate your coming. One more question. Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, for either one of you two. So Game and Fish has, if you disagree with the amount they set on the animals, or if they disagree whether or not the actual depredation took place, there's an appeal process. Is there the same, similar setup in the Department of Ag under this program?
Mr. Chairman, that would be based on the rules that we have written. In the past, I do not believe that was in our rules, but we could take that into consideration as we draft our new rules for this program going forward for the next 3 years.
Okay, thank you. And the values are determined in the rules too. The animal values are determined in your rule-making process, correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we put how we would value them in the rules, not the actual dollar amount, but at the time of
Okay,
it would go.
all right, thank you. I think we're good. Thank you for your testimony. Other testimony? Come on up, Director.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Brian Nesvik, Director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. So I'll provide you a little bit of information here that may or may not help, I don't know. But as was pointed out by the bringer, we manage wolves within the area of the state that's designated as the trophy game area, which is essentially the northwest corner of the state. And everywhere else in the state, they're designated as predatory animals, meaning, similar to coyotes, they can be taken in any manner and by anybody without a license or without any kind of a season. Within that area of the state where we do manage wolves, we have a damage compensation program. It's similar in some ways to the program that Mr. Johnson described. We, in the past, when Department of Ag ran this program, we helped them set their program up. And in a lot of ways, it aligned with the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission's damage compensation program. Maybe a little difference. We pay when we compensate a livestock owner, on calves, we pay them what the calf would have brought when they normally take those calves to market. So if they lose a calf in July, it's confirmed, and they come off of their forest allotment in October and ship in October, we pay them for whatever those other calves brought in October. Everything else is fair market value at the time of death, for the most part. And there's a little bit of variance there, unique situations and circumstances. Just as a little bit of reference, so the average, if we go back to fiscal year 17 and look, it varies widely up in the trophy game area, but it's the total number of claims has ranged anywhere from 21 to 43. And the amounts paid has ranged from 142,000 to 390,000. And that's specific just to wolf depredation. So it varies widely. And during that period of time, there were times when wolves were protected by the federal government and times when they were not. And certainly our claims generally are much lower when the state has management authority and an ability to manage wolves. Our estimates of the number of wolves that are outside of that area, and we don't intensively monitor wolves in the predator area, but the last estimate we had put us at about at least 39 wolves, at least 5 packs, and at least 1 breeding pair that were outside of the trophy game area. And so basically throughout the other 85% of Wyoming, that's where they're not protected. We've heard of and investigated. A lot of times a producer who doesn't normally have wolves will call us because they don't know what killed their livestock. And so we'll initially go out and look, thinking it could have been a mountain lion or a black bear. And then when we get there, we figure out it's a wolf. And we've worked side by side with Department of Ag when that's happened. But because of that, we're aware a lot of times of where we do have wolf depredations. And I'm all up and down the Bighorns, certainly even down Muddy Gap. I think that Representative Davis's comment about the potential for there to be more in the southern part of the state as wolves expand in Colorado is very valid. And then certainly in the bringer of the Bills district, there's pretty chronic year-to-year wolf depredation that's outside of the trophy game area, just barely. And so there certainly is, on an annual basis, while it varies, there certainly is damage by wolves to livestock. It's almost always sheep, lambs, calves, and then sometimes yearlings. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I think I would stand for any other questions the committee might have.
Questions, committee? A question I've got, in the trophy area alone, do we still have producers that aren't eligible for federal compensation from the wolf kills? Because for a while we had that close to Yellowstone Park where they were introduced, those producers were paid, and then there was this gray area that we tried to address by the state of people that couldn't do anything, got no compensation from the wolf kill, that were just right outside of it. And they couldn't do anything about the wolves either. Do we still have that situation?
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware of any federal compensation at all for any Wyoming producers. So it's, to my knowledge, it's just Wyoming Game and Fish, or if this bill passes, Wyoming Department of Agriculture. Those areas that are just outside of the trophy game area, those exist. I mean, there's still, Representative Winter has a situation in his district where there's wolves that run back and forth constantly, and they cause damage on both sides of the line.
Okay. Other questions, committee? I may follow up with we don't have time to explore this whole problem, but I thank you so much for your testimony. Representative Winter.
Brian Hodel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a member of this committee, I'd like to ask Director Nesvik a question about, in your opinion, is this problem going to get worse in the predator zone? In other words, those wolves are moving east, are they not? And it's going to continue to increase?
Yeah, I guess first of all, I hope not, but I certainly believe that as wolves expand, especially to the south of us, that it certainly could. One thing that we see is that when wolves expand and they go to new areas where they've not been before, they're almost like a commodity, and they don't last very long. They get in trouble, and locals find out about it, and they're not around. The problem doesn't last for very long. But for that initial period of time when wolves first show up somewhere, it can be, I mean, I can remember people losing, like around Muddy Gap, Shirley Basin, people losing several calves in a very short amount of time, several sheep and lambs. So I hope that it doesn't expand, but it certainly could.
Follow up, Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Nesvik, part of the reason for this bill is to draw attention to the problem that we have in Wyoming with wolves. I mean, in my estimation, the wolf is an illegal animal that they were introduced illegally, and they were introduced earlier than they said they would be. So it's pretty obvious that the wolf has done damage to the Wyoming wildlife. The moose population is down to nothing in many places that I'm familiar with. And so I'd just like to know your overall impression of the wolf and what your thoughts are for the future. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Winter, there's no doubt that the introduction of wolves into Wyoming has changed a lot of changed the lives of folks that work and recreate in areas where we have wolves now. I will tell you that the absolute most important thing for the state of Wyoming relative to wolf management is that we continue to maintain control as a state of management. We see dramatic changes in both the number of wolves and their impacts on some of our ungulate populations when the state has the ability to manage. We completely unregulated. We had times when there were just in the trophy game area alone, 250 wolves, and we're able to manage those down with hunting seasons down to a number that makes a pretty big difference, 140. And 140 to 160 wolves, we can keep them off of the endangered species list. That is the single most important thing the state of Wyoming can do. I think if we continue to do that and we achieve state authority over management of another large carnivore, the grizzly bear, I think it's manageable over time, but it takes state control to be able to do that.
Thank you, Director. Any further questions? Further public testimony? We have, okay. Brent, and then we'll get, both of you can come on up. And we do have someone online as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. Try to keep my comments to specifically to what this bill does. Establishing a fund in the predator zone for livestock that's killed by wolves. I think this is a fantastic idea, sitting firmly in support of this bill. This problem's getting worse. One of my members in the north end of Albany County, they ran sheep for over 100 years because, at least partly because of the wolf problem, they're no longer running sheep. As far as the funding, it appears from what I've been able to understand in the discussion, I'm not sure $135,000 for 3 years is enough. Moving that up to probably $250,000 is a good idea, in my opinion. And I think a lot of the issues that have come up kind of related to this bill, I think can be worked out in rules. How you set the value, the documentation, that's what rules are for, is to get down to the specific nature of the problem. With that, Mr. Chairman, sitting firm in support of this bill, I would sit for any questions you or the committee may have for me.
Committee. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Winnie.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. Some years ago, I had a conversation with a rancher that I know well, good close friend there in the Pinedale area. And he remarked to me one day, you know when wolves got to my area of the state, they're near Pinedale. And he cited a year, seems like it was the late 90s. He said, my typical attrition on my herd was about 3%, his numbers. He said, in 1 year, my attrition jumped from 3% to something like 10 or so percent. That's my margin of profitability, and that's what wolves did to me. So that's a good idea there. The other piece of that, I would recall to the committee's memory a picture that was taken in the Bondurant area right near my home some years ago of about 20 elk carcasses, picture taken by a Wyoming game and fish agent that wolves had killed and they had retrieved. They simply killed. They didn't actually eat or consume the carcasses. But the point being the number of carcasses that had been killed. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Questions, committee? Thank you, sir. Any other public testimony in the room here? Thank you. We have someone on Zoom. Okay. Is this Laura? Laura Pearson, go ahead and proceed.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Laura Tolliver Pearson. I'm a 6th-generation sheep rancher in Southwest Wyoming. I would support this bill. Not sure the funding is enough. The introduction of the wolves was just another program where the federal government decided that they knew better what was good for Wyoming than the Wyoming citizens. The introduction of the wolves put us out of the sheep industry. We had to give up our summer allotments because we had no defense. We couldn't destroy the wolves, and by the time officials made it up to verify the kills, there was nothing left but a little wool left in the brush, and they wouldn't verify. So we had no choice but to sell our summer allotments because we weren't going to put our livestock through that torture. You have to understand that in on one herd up on our forest allotment, there was a pack of 26 wolves on us. And every 2 weeks, we would go up to count that herd. And besides what the herders knew that they had lost, we were short 50 lambs every 2 weeks. Would there be any ability in this bill for ranchers to take pictures for verification? Because like I said, by the time Wildlife Services got up to verify our kills, there was nothing left of the lambs and they would not verify them. The numbers of claims are likely severely deficient, as many producers now know that by the time Wildlife Services get there, there will be nothing left to verify. So you have to understand that we used to run 14,000 ewes. We were one of the largest producers in Wyoming. And now we are running 750 ewes. So we're not completely out of the sheep business, but pretty much due to the introduction of the wolves. And in my opinion, the wolves should be considered predatory across the state. So this hits home for me. And if you want livestock producers to continue being in business in this state, these wolves have to be taken care of. And I'm sorry to say that, but the federal government shouldn't have been able to come in and do this to us. Our state needs to take back our rights to protect our livestock and to stay in business. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you, Mrs. Pearson. Any questions? All right. I believe some of the concerns you had, the pictures and whatnot, would be, you'd have to find out if they work for the Department of Ag and their rules. I'm guessing they may. Any further testimony? Now, committee, what's your pleasure? Did we already move it? Okay, moved by Craigo, seconded by Schlegel. Schlegel, now amendments, discussion on the bill. Representative Davis.
Representative Craigo, would you happen to up your ante to maybe 300,000?
Yeah, Representative Davis, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Representative Davis, John Conrad. Representative Conrad here, I would go to 300,000. What's your recommendation? For, I apologize, let's back up real quick for our staff here on page, so we can clarify this correctly for the page 2. Page 3, line 9. I make an amendment that we increase this value from $135,000 to $300,000.
Okay, so it's been moved by Conrad, seconded by Craigo. Any discussion on that? Yes, Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just sort of a conforming amendment. That's also going to be on line 8 where the written number is. I'm sure our good secretary has that, but just for clarification purposes.
Okay, any further discussion on that motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. And this'll, John, this'll be, if the bill passes, well, if it passes, you'll have to go to appropriations, and one of us can help with that if you'd like. Just keep us, question on the bill. Are we done with discussion? Okay, question. Oh, go ahead, Representative Alleman.
Mr. Chairman, if this goes to appropriations, are they gonna have time to get it through this session? Because this looks to me like this is a very important bill that we need to have on the floor. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. That's why we're doing it here. If we're able to, the bigger problem is what can we get done on general file, and time is short. All of you new members will see that as we near the end of our time with House bills, but we'll sure try to get it before appropriations and to the floor in that discussion if it passes. I'm guessing it may. Ready to vote, Mark?
Representative Allemand,
Aye.
Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Conrad,
Aye.
Representative Crago,
Aye.
Representative Davis,
Aye.
Representative Slagle,
Aye.
Representative Winter, Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
I have Representative Allred's vote here, and it's 9-0, and this bill passes with amendments.
Okay, and we still have several bills to go. We're gonna take a quick break. We'll try 5 minutes, and I'll be back hammering at the mic as quick as I can, so. You ready? Are you ready, Bob? Yes, sir. All right, we're gonna, we'll call the meeting back to order. Next bill for our consideration, should have laid that out before I started talking, is Representative Davis's bill. You may stay seated where you are, or you can go down in front of us.
Okay, go wherever you want me.
It's up to you.
I'll just go down below then. and look
Okay,
at all
doke.
of it.
I just had a trouble. Yes, I'll just step back there. I'll hear it when it rings. Okay. All right. Trying to find the bill number.
180.
Representative Davis, why don't you introduce that as you start the bill? Go ahead when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to introduce to you House Bill 180.
180.
This bill has to do with the protocol and reporting possibilities of brucellosis. And there's some, an attached amendment to the bill already, where we've cleaned up some of the language and everything that's in there. And if with that, I would take any questions. Would you like me to read the amendments in?
We'll work on that as we start working the bill.
Okay.
Right now, we'll take other testimony and maybe ask questions on the amendments and if they satisfy other people. Do any questions before we start? Well, public comment. Director, come on up.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Steve True, Director of the Wyoming Livestock Board. Just for my clarification, are we discussing the bill with or without the amendments? Two different discussions.
I think we'll discuss it with the amendments.
Okay.
The bill is by itself. You can explain why the amendments help it or satisfy the livestock board.
Mr. Chairman, and just with me is Dr. Holly Hazel, the state veterinarian. We'll discuss most of those with you. I do want to mention that the committee should each have a copy of a map of the designated surveillance area, so you know what we're talking about. And with a kind of a quick 20,000 foot fighter attack of the brucellosis program up there. That area is our greater Yellowstone area, brucellosis area of concern. There's a corresponding area also in Idaho, one in Montana, that all surround that greater Yellowstone area. That is and Dr. Hazel will correct me if I misstate some of this. That is an area overseen by the USDA for the brucellosis program for that greater Yellowstone area. Each state within that maintains an MOU with the USDA as to how we will deal with that brucellosis in our own state. That being said, Wyoming has an MOU and our own program heavily listed in statute in our Chapter 2 and Chapter 6 rules. But I want to apprise the committee that there are intermittent regular reviews by the USDAs of our programs, and Dr. Hazel will be undergoing one of those this spring. So that's one of the things on our plate as we looked at this bill and the amendments in this bill, so as not to jeopardize the reading from the USDA of our program and in ways that could maybe jeopardize our brucellosis-free status in the state. So that's kind of an overview of how that brucellosis game works at the governmental level. Dr. Hazel will get deeply into, I think, into the program and what we're doing. And I might let her visit right now with the amendments, other than I will start with on the First Amendment and the one to promulgate rules. I believe that it's been determined that our board already maintains that authority in their enabling statutes to promulgate any rules for the brucellosis program. So that's one of the amendments where that was stricken. And that is something that we operate on. And for the new members, the Livestock Board quickly is a 7-member board of livestock producers around the state that govern. Their statutory mission is to protect the state's producers from theft and disease. And this is one of those programs where we do that. They appoint both Dr. Hazel and myself to our positions. Each of those producers handles one of the appointed board districts in the state. They are appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate, and then they promulgate the rules and make policy based on that. Also in their statutory mission is to foster any legislation they believe furthers the industry, which is where we weigh in on some of this. And we are speaking not only as an agency and admin, but as designees of our board in this forum. So if Dr. Hazel, if you want to jump in there anywhere.
Dr. Hazel, a question on the background. What types of animals are affected by brucellosis so the committee's aware and why it's important?
Good morning, Chairman Eklund. I'm Dr. Hallie Hazel, Wyoming State Veterinarian, and I'll give you just a brief synopsis of the background of what the DSA is and answer your question, Chairman Eklund, at the same time. So the designated surveillance area for brucellosis targets primarily cattle and bison. And the boundaries as we see them on this map were established in 2011 in agreement with the governor of Wyoming and the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, Wyoming Livestock Board, and USDA APHIS Veterinary Services. And the purpose of this is to basically help the producers in our entire state market their cattle and their bison by drawing the boundary lines that we have before us. That allows us to create a brucellosis area for testing and surveillance. And it's based on the risk of our wildlife and recognizes the fact that brucellosis is transmitted primarily from wildlife to our cattle and bison, not within cattle and bison herds that we currently have. In the past, brucellosis was an issue of cattle to cattle transmission. In today's society, it's an issue of transmission from wildlife to livestock, being cattle and bison in this case. So this was established in 2011. Currently, we require brucellosis surveillance testing for animals that are either changing ownership or leaving the DSA, designated surveillance area. Testing is also required at custom slaughter facilities all over the state of Wyoming. So whether they're in the DSA or outside of the DSA, testing is required of all animals 12 months of age and over at all Wyoming custom slaughter facilities. We test approximately 80 to 90,000 samples per year for brucellosis. And also Idaho and Montana have a surveillance program as well, as Director True mentioned, and test cattle, similar to our rules. So that's established to be able to market our cattle, hopefully without excess testing requirements from other states, although a few still exist. Just a little bit about what happens to these samples. So the veterinarians, the testing is done by veterinarians within the DSA. And usually they'll test during routine fall herd work. Sometimes it's in the spring, but as a rule, it's during routine fall herd work. Once that veterinarian collects those samples, they are then shipped to the Wyoming State Veterinary Laboratory. And if we have time, Mr. Chairman, I'd like for Dr. Carrie Songeroth, who is our Wyoming State Vet Lab Interim Director, who I believe is online. She will explain to you a little bit about what happens to those samples at the laboratory, as this bill does impact the outcome of the results of those samples and how they are distributed to our livestock producers. If we have time for her to speak for just a moment.
We do. Ms. Songeroth, go ahead when you're ready.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you for your time. So when we receive blood samples at the Wyoming State Vet Lab, there's a series of sections that they move through in our laboratory. So first, the boxes are opened when the samples are delivered. They're given a number, we call it the accession number, that tracks the samples through our laboratory. So for brucellosis in particular, the people that are submitting the brucellosis samples to us are referring veterinarians. So we take the blood samples. Usually we have them to the section of the lab that does the testing anywhere between noon and 3 p.m. of the day that's received. Following the arrival of the sample, testing's performed. And we do a couple of different tests here at the Wyoming State Vet Lab. The first one is called FPA. It stands for fluorescent polarization assay. And we do this in a plate format, so we can test about 90 samples at one time, which is great. Particularly on days that we receive 4,000 samples. So we test it on the FPA plate format. If that sample tests within the suspect range or a positive range, we take that sample and repeat the test using the FPA tube test. So we're testing that sample then individually in duplicate to determine the number. Depending on the number there, if it's in the positive range or the suspect range, we would perform one additional test. It's called the BAPA. And depending on what the BAPA shows, positive or negative, all of that information then gets put into an email, and the sample is then sent to our reference lab. This is the National Veterinary Services Laboratory, NVSL, and they then proceed with additional tests for confirmation. So when we perform the testing, we report the test just in our computer system as positive or suspect. It's based on the test results. At this point, it's preliminary. It's not classifying the animal as having brucellosis or being a reactor. It's just the test result. And so we then have to wait for the confirmation test from NVSL in order to then report the final results from them, working with the epidemiologist, the USDA epidemiologist, the Wyoming Livestock Board, and APHIS to be able to classify that animal as a reactor, as a suspect, and so forth. So it involves multiple different agencies at that stage, but WSVL's role in all of this is to simply test the blood samples that we receive in a timely fashion. So I mentioned that some days we receive up to 4,000 samples. We still try to get those test results out the day of receipt, even if it means staying late at the lab, because we're aware that some of the animals are ready to be transported. So we do have those results typically within 24 hours of being received at the lab, usually less than that. I think that's about it as far as the testing flow. Are there any questions, or is there something I didn't cover, Dr. Hazel, that you need me to touch on?
Questions, committee, or further input, Dr. Hazel?
Chairman Eklund, and thank you, Dr. Sangarath, and I think that clarifies it for us. We may have a few more questions, though.
Okay, thank you.
So, Chairman Eklund, that's a brief description of what we do. When you are ready, I can address where that plays into this bill, if you'd like us to discuss that now.
Go ahead and discuss that.
Thank you, Chairman Eklund. So if you look on page 4, I'll start with that one. I think I should start there, I guess. So I'm going to back up. I'm sorry, Chairman Eklund. Let's go back to page 2. And I'm going to address this as written with the amendments as we discussed. If you look on line, starting on line 16 through 19 on page 2, it does state that we may release any information related to a confirmed non-negative brucellosis test in the county where the animal testing non-negative is located. So we're going to clarify what our definition of non-negative is in this next portion, okay? If we go to page 4, line 15, lines 15 through 19. On line 18, with the amendment, it should state that, or line 17, the owner of an animal that has tested non-negative for brucellosis not later than 3 days after receipt of the initial laboratory confirmation. And I'm reading that with the amendment. Our definition of laboratory confirmation is the result that we receive from the National Veterinary Services Laboratory in Ames. So once the preliminary results are completed by the state lab, then it's sent to the national lab for confirmatory results. That process can take anywhere from 7 to 10 days after the state lab releases preliminary results. So we just want to make sure that the committee understands what definition of laboratory confirmation truly is, of a non-negative sample. The other item I want to note in this that you need to take into consideration, or that we recommend that you take into consideration, is that a non-negative sample simply means that that test result is non-negative. It does not mean that the animal has brucellosis. Non-negative test results can indicate that the animal might have an abscess, or foot rot, or a hardware disease, or tularemia, or anything that can cross-react with that test. It does not imply that the animal has brucellosis per se. We have non-negative samples on a somewhat routine basis, and those non-negative results can be on animals located anywhere in this state. We typically do not release notification of a non-negative to the public because it implies that we might have brucellosis elsewhere when that is not the implication that should occur, and can create some caution on the parts of our neighboring states where they may have brucellosis outside of the DSA when that's in fact not true. So Chairman Eklund, I'm sure there are questions.
Questions, committee? Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Hazel, so one of the questions I had was the recommended amendment on line 8, page 2, removing the word all. What's the purpose of that? Because the way I'm reading the amendment, we are putting some sideboards on that. We're adding, it's not just in the county, which you just addressed, it's those parts of the county that are within the DSA. So why are we removing the word all from there? And just curious about that, I guess.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo, if I can take a stab at that. The word all would implied to us a press release. No other way we can notify all the producers in the county. Then again, that triggers that notification to other potential regulatory agencies that there's a problem when maybe there isn't. This could be, so by removing the word all, we would inform livestock producers, vets, and brand inspectors in the designated surveillance county where the non-negative test has been confirmed, but we would be notifying the producer, contact herds as necessary, brand inspectors in the event of a quarantine, and veterinarians who maybe had done the blood test. But it's not a blast to everybody that we have a suspect, because the suspect level, as Dr. Hazel just said, might be really low, might be something else entirely. And if it's in the DSA, not to trigger response to an event that we don't have a confirmation on yet.
Representative Craigo.
So Director, Mr. Chairman, excuse me, Director, don't we already do that anyways? I mean, don't you already have a system set up to notify surrounding producers if a non-negative comes in?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo, we do. I will defer the process of that to Dr. Hazel, but it's not all. If we're trying to reach to all the producers in the county, we have no surreptitious way to do that that doesn't make that a public event.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Then Director, Dr. Hazel, then what exactly are we changing? If we take the word all out, what are we changing about our current protocol or system?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo, not much. I think by removing the promulgate rules and allowing us to establish a protocol, communication protocol, we already have one that Dr. Hazel, the vet lab, USDA operates within to not conflict with any rules that may be in the in the USDA UMNR, our rules or our statute. I think we're fine. I think we already do that. But I think if the committee cares to direct us to establish a new protocol, we can do that. This will certainly generate conversation and a board meeting or two in the areas of concern, areas of brucellosis in the greater Yellowstone area, to talk about this with producers if they have questions or think there's hiccups in the way we notify now.
Okay, Representative Alderman.
Mr. Chairman, if I understand this bill right, this bill is just covering the designated area? It's not covering the whole state?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Alleman, parts of it. The part there in section Romanet 12 on page 2 is referring to the county within the designated surveillance area where that non-negative test may have occurred. I think the rest of it in the amendment in 1118-117, which is what we call our confidentiality statute, and also in 19102, that one, those could happen if we had that brucellosis test anywhere. We're notifying that producer. We would notify you if you had an animal that popped at that non-negative status. Dr. Hazel would be talking to you about it and your bleeding vet. But so it's both. The first section talks about establishing that protocol in the designated surveillance area. Page 4, line 15, that section could speak to producers anywhere in the state. Because the state vet is gonna contact and visit with anybody that has a result that's non-negative at some point.
Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, my interpretation of it is if we remove the word all, that leaves the vet the ability to notify the immediate area. Where if you leave the word all in there, that's everything outlined within this red. So if you say had a test in Afton, you'd have to notify somebody up in Powell. That would be irrelevant to what was going on. So you're just concerned within the DSA. So by removing all, that gives the vet the ability to identify site specific. If that was my interpretation of removing the word all.
Mr. Chairman,
Doctor.
just a little bit of clarification that might help the committee. What our concern initially with this bill is when we're talking about a non-negative sample. As I mentioned previously, a non-negative sample doesn't necessarily mean the animal has brucellosis. It can be due to anything. So 99% of the time, if we have a non-negative sample, the only people we contact are the producer and their veterinarian until we can do further confirmatory testing, either of the herd or further tests at the labs or a secondary test on that animal to say, is this truly a brucellosis concern, or does this animal have something else that is completely unrelated to brucellosis? And we only notify that producer, not the neighbors, not anybody else, until we know what it is that we're speaking of in reference to a non-negative sample. If that helps clarify.
So a question I'd have is if we change it to a positive brucellosis test, and it's gone to Iowa and gone through what you want, if we change that language, then does it change what you're actually going to be doing in your office? Or will it? I think the concern here is to get the bordering ranches involved earlier, is the way I understand it. And we removed the word all. If we change the word brucellosis, then have we changed the statute? Because it seems like maybe we have. Representative Davis, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think once they have completed on page 4, step F, then a different protocol comes within their chain of command is how they would handle that. But by removing all, that takes out the just if. Once you get into F, after they have a confirmed, then there's a different protocol that the vet would follow for the area. Kind of like the Chicken Little, that the sky is falling, but where's it falling, you know?
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, and Representative Davis explained the all much more succinctly than I did, I think. The operation of that standard communication protocol on page 2 as amended is doable, is implementable for us. And I think it will enable another conversation between our board, those producers, and the DSA to talk about that protocol. They can voice their concerns, and staff and the board can voice the sideboards that are already in our agreements and our UMNRs and our statute. Yeah, we get what you're saying, but we can't cross this line. We can't step outside here because now we're potentially inhibiting the marketability of somebody else's cattle over here. That is a proviso I should always add when I read our statutory mission, is my board always says the unspoken there is our part of protection of livestock interest is protect your marketability as well. That's where these statutes and rules come into play, particularly even if you're not in the DSA. Those folks are under rigorous restrictions at this time that, for instance, Representative Crago is not. So we want to be able to walk that line and protect everybody's ability to market, be they in or out of the designated surveillance area. I would note, and maybe if you would tell me when our AG asked me to insert another word, and maybe Representative Crago can vet that statement when we get to that, on that First Amendment. He thinks there needs to be another that it should read brand inspectors in the designated surveillance area, in the designated surveillance within the, insert another right prior to county, so that we're defining that county where that test result was found. That was one. I'm walking through the amendments now,
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
Okay.
If the committee's okay with it.
You'll note that Representative Davis has struck some language. He's taken it out of the bill. The language still resides in statute for the state vet's reportable disease authorities. Struck the Romanet 8, line 12 on page 4, that section. We would respectfully suggest that in section F, knowing how we define and how the labs define confirmation, if you want to do receipt, Dr. Hazel has some verbiage there for referring to that state labs test, so we can notify that owner within 3 days of our receipt of that preliminary result, maybe a preliminary result rather than a confirmation. And I'll let her, she's got the.
Go ahead.
Chairman Eklund, one of the and Dr. Songeroth is on and can correct me if I state this a little bit off. On page 4, line 18, brucellosis not later than 3 days after receipt of the preliminary laboratory confirmation. No, preliminary, after receipt of the preliminary laboratory results. So on 19, it would remove the word confirmation and put result. And on line 18, it would say, then 3 days after receipt of the preliminary laboratory results. And Dr. Songeroth, please correct me if I've stated that a little bit off.
Yeah, Dr. Sondroff.
Thank you, Chairman. So currently, when we have the preliminary positive or suspect, in other words, non-negative results, those results are not released to the producer until we get confirmation. So those results are released to the brucellosis group. That consists of the state veterinarian, assistant state veterinarian, the area veterinarian in charge, that's APHIS, the USDA epidemiologist, the laboratory director, and the serology supervisor. So there's an email list that the results are released to, and the sample is then shipped to MVSL, but no other results are released. At that point, Dr. Hazel or the other assistant state veterinarian then contacts the client, which is the veterinarian or the producer, to let them know that that is what is happening. But we don't, at this time, release a positive or suspect on our official result report because we're still waiting for confirmation. So I did mention that the testing is completed, like we do have those results, but they're not released at the time. And so when we send the samples to NVSL, we send them overnight shipping, with road closures and weather and things like that. Sometimes there's delays. NVSL, keep in mind, it is the National Veterinary Services Laboratory, but they're just another laboratory. And so they have workloads and time sensitive things that they have to do. So typically NVSL takes about a week to turn around these results for us, to confirm them. So in the grand scheme of things, with shipping, with reporting, by the time a client has drawn blood, sent it to us, we've tested it, sent it to NVSL, NVSL has done the confirmatory testing and sent it back to us, I would say that's easily 10 to 14 days from the original sample date.
Okay, a question I've got, I asked it before and I'm not sure I've got the answer yet. If we change the language from non-negative to a positive brucellosis, then does that include this 2-week period of time to get all of the information you need?
So I would say when we report our results, they're preliminary. And so I think in your mind, when you're saying positive, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when you're saying positive, that's like the final positive, yes, this animal has antibodies to brucellosis.
Yeah.
And so we're not able to do that. The Wyoming State Vet Lab is not able. We're just able to say these first test results that we did indicate there's a positive, but we have to have those confirmed by another lab in order to determine if they're truly positive or if they're a false positive, like Dr. Hazel mentioned, because there can be cross reactions with other things. And so, if we were to release those preliminary results, which we're fully capable of doing, then what happens is the client and the producer has in hand a test result that isn't the final result, but they're seeing that on a page it says positive. And I feel like there could be some misinformation there and actions that aren't directed, and maybe information's getting out to neighbors, things like that, when it actually isn't the final result. It's a preliminary, and it could be a false positive. And so I feel like it might be setting us up for a lot of damage control that doesn't need to actually happen because it's just the preliminary result.
Okay.
Does
All
that
right.
answer your question? I'm sorry, it's a little complicated.
Guess what I'm getting at is, does the positive brucellosis test, is it positive after it's gone through the Iowa testing? The further testing, and I would guess that that's when you would call it a positive brucellosis.
That is correct, Chairman. That is when we can call it a positive brucellosis test. Then the follow-up is when the epidemiologists come in and they look at, okay, we have these positive test results. Now, was this cattle herd mingling with elk? was this herd within the DSA? Was it, they look at all these other factors in order to classify the animal as a Brucella reactor or a Brucella suspect. So they have to, it's a piece of the puzzle. The test results are just one piece of the puzzle in order then to say, okay, this herd, yes, needs to be quarantined and all the additional testing that goes along with that, or no, we don't think so. We think that the risk is pretty low and we can move on. So there's different layers. It's kind of like an onion for this, but you are correct. The NVSL is the one that makes the final determination of a positive brucellosis test, but doesn't necessarily classify the animal.
Okay, thank you. So Representative Davis and our Wyoming livestock, would you be okay if we changed it to a positive brucellosis, assuming that that happens after? That would be the final result that comes back from the Iowa Testing Center. And I'm not sure that this altogether fixes what we're trying to do. It doesn't. Oh dear. Okay, go ahead, Representative Davis.
I'll defer this over to Dr. Hazel.
Chairman Eklund, if the intention of the bill is for us to notify the producers and those that are mentioned in the previous paragraphs, after receipt of a state non-negative preliminary result, changing the bill to a positive brucellosis statement removes that request. If the intention of the bill is for us to promulgate rules to notify producers within 3 days of a confirmatory brucellosis result, we would lean towards the verbiage that you have just suggested, but it depends upon the intention of the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I think the intention of the bill is to notify the landowners of the preliminary test.
Okay.
Okay, so so it would read 3 days after receipt of a preliminary laboratory result.
Okay. All right, questions, committee? Okay. Other testimony? I think we've covered everybody. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Been moved by Crago, seconded by Slagle. Discussion on the bill.
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to go back through the amendments as proposed to make sure everybody's clear, or is everybody clear?
Well, we've discussed them quite a bit. Go ahead, Representative Conrad.
Chairman Eklund, thank you. Dr. Hazel, just a quick question, and maybe it's for the director and/or Representative Davis. As I view the brucellosis designated, the designated surveillance area of the DSA, I do notice in the footnotes, rather, it's a 2011 document. Can you explain to me why this has not been updated since, or is there a frequency that's incorporated as we talk about the migration of animals, et cetera, so forth? As recently as last testimony, wolves continue to migrate, et cetera, not applicable, but just a curiosity, in the 12 years, is there another study or another area to review the current DSA?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Conrad, every year, Game and Fish Director and Dr. Hazel will review the boundaries of the DSA based mostly on game and fish testing and our results, and either recommend to the board to move it or not, and we have not moved it since. We did have an area of concern, language we're changing in another bill that we'll cross over to you here pretty quick. But we did have an area of concern that was Bighorn, Sheridan, and Johnson counties for a brief period of time. Shrunk then to Bighorn County, then shrunk to 3 hunt areas in Bighorn County, finally rescinded in 2019 due to several years of no positive elk tests from hunter testing. So that's the only stamp, but some of our one of our other states surrounding in the greater Yellowstone area, has had to expand our DSA a few times. So we're very pleased that that border has not moved. In fact, this spring, the board had a meeting just based solely on shrinking it a little bit on the southern border. We just determined we didn't have enough test results on elk to make that decision at this time. So.
For the Mr. Chairman, thank you. For the non-brucellosis folks, I would just make a suggestion for consideration specifically, if you could just imprint updated on X date or X year. Because if you look at this on totality, it looks like it's 12 years old.
I understand, Representative Conrad, Mr. Chairman. We'll bring you maps that say current, even though it's going to be the same. Thank you.
Further questions? Okay, further discussion on the bill. Specifically the amendment. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like you to move the amendments as presented.
Okay. Without the insertion of the, I'm on line 14 of the amendment at, after within.
That would have been
Insertion
on,
of the was a suggestion.
would that have been on page 2, line 9?
Yep.
Between and brand?
I don't
And
know.
insert the brand inspector in the DSA designated surveillance area?
Yeah, within the is.
Mr. Chairman, if I may
Yep, go
pipe
ahead.
in. So the actually goes in front of the word county. So on the bill, it's gonna look like you have two thes in together, but it goes after the word. So if you look on the amendment, it says designated surveillance area within the county.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Would you be okay with that insertion to your amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on the amendment?
I would propose a friendly amendment to the amendment, which is to take in Dr. Hazel's recommendations on page 4. So on line 18, it would read receipt of the preliminary instead of the word initial. And then on line 19, we would strike the word confirmation and insert the word results. I believe that's what the good doctor requested us to do.
Discussion committee?
We need a second.
Are you, okay, yeah, we probably need a second on the amendment to the amendment. Okay, we've got a second. Representative Conrad, no? Okay. I'm getting out of my Robert's rules. So we need, I don't know who first amended it or seconded it. Did you second it? Yes, I believe you did, Alan. Okay. So are you okay with that change?
Yeah, one question I had for Doctor. Did you want lab results? That's what I had written down when.
Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
So on line 18, brucellosis not later than 3 days after receipt of the preliminary laboratory results.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's what I thought I'd heard.
Okay. So we have an amended amendment. Are you okay with it,
Yes,
Representative Davis?
Mr. Chairman. You want me to
Okay.
second it?
I think it's fairly clear to the committee, and we'll try to make sure Mark is clear on what the language is, probably after we're all done here. Ready to vote? All those in favor of the amendment as amended, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay. Amendment passes. Any further discussion on the bill or amendments, committee? Okay, I think we're ready to vote, Mark.
Representative Allemand.
Aye.
Representative Allred.
Aye.
Representative Banks.
Aye.
Representative Conrad.
Aye.
Representative Craigo.
Aye.
Representative Davis.
Aye.
Representative Slagle.
Aye.
Representative Winter.
Aye.
Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
9-0. It's do pass with amendments.
Next bill for our consideration will be Representative Strzok's bill on absences. And my desk is a mess, so you can introduce the bill number as well. Representative Strzok, when you're ready. And we need to go fast because we still have one bill after this, and both of them are easy, so.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
But I
Chairman.
said that about the others.
So this is House Bill number 175. And it is an act relating to student attendance, modifying the duties of local boards of trustee, modifying excused absences for events associated with the state fair, and providing for an effective date. So the bill is addressing the issue of unexcused absence for 4-H members. And there are schools who are not excusing the students when they are absent while participating in 4-H activities or while getting their projects ready for the fair. And that is the objective of the bill, is to protect the student from these unexcused absences. Thank you.
Any questions? Yes, Representative Conrad.
Chairman Eklund, Representative Soar, just a quick question. Having served on the school board as a vice chairman for many, many years, my question is this really pulling away the local authority that those respective districts have? It concerns me because I don't know if this is an acute issue or not, but at least in Southwest Wyoming, Uinta County School District number 4, we obviously support and define those absences, et cetera. So are we putting a blanket mandate upon every school district that they approve such absences, specifically as it relates to the state fair?
Thank you, Ms. Chair and Representative Conrad. As I understand it, no. If you'll go on page 2, it just defines unexcused absences right there. Tells us that it's not taking away from any of what the school board already has. And just, we protect the FFA because it's a school. Thank you.
Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, follow-up.
I do understand, and thank you for that. Specifically, line 10, it says, or events associated with participation in annual schools fair. So my understanding of the bill specifically is that if the school districts cannot assign an unexcused absence to a person, or rather a student who's attending the state fair or ancillary events. My concern, though, is if you have a student that is specifically out for whatever reason, truancy, or whatever the case may be, and then they come back the day before the state fair and want to go to the state fair, the respective school districts put in could be in a compromising position to allow that excused absence when they've already been unexcused for, say, a week or 3 days, or the case may be, if that makes sense. I guess my concern, an overall concern, is that we are promulgating rules on respective county school districts, specifically as it relates to state fairs. I hope you can appreciate that. And for any clarification, I surely welcome them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Representative Strzok.
Well, I can guess understand that problem, but and I guess why I would go with that, if they are truant, that usually, even if you've got other issues, even with your FFA, I think that's something that then they would have to address. I mean, that seems like a bigger problem. I mean, that student already has problems, and probably they wouldn't even be able to participate in football. I understand if they've already got those other problems. I mean, it just would be related to that, is how I would see it.
So I guess something I might add is it does include a pre-approved absence on line 5. Does that address where you're going?
Mr. Chairman, it does not.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative. So just a quick question. So obviously on lines 8 and 9, we're already saying students participating in the annual state fair. held under Title 11 as an exhibitor shall be considered as participating in a district extracurricular activity, and that'll be considered an excused absence. So tell me, just so I can get it straight in my mind, exactly what events are we talking about by adding your language on top of the language that's already there, if that makes sense?
Well, thank you. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo. The problem is these kids have not been excused to be getting their livestock or their projects. It doesn't have to be livestock, but haven't been excused to get them prepared and ready. These kids have been, your FFA kids, it's underneath a school sanctioned. So they've been excused, but those 4-H students haven't been. So this is just giving these kids time to get their projects ready. And so it's not always, there may not be other events, but sometimes there are things that you participate before to even make it to the state fair. And I'm not sure, it's just opening it up so these kids are able to be excused to get their projects ready.
Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Representative, so what we're trying to do with your language is say, for example, the week before, like my daughter who's sitting in the back row back here, if she's getting her sheep ready to go to state fair the week before state fair, and that happens to fall on the first week of school or something, that would count as an excused absence because, and maybe school districts aren't doing this properly. I don't know the answer to that, but the language that's already in there seems to protect the time they're at the state fair. So when they're actually at the state fair, the week of state fair, they're exhibiting, that should be an excused absence. But what we're trying to do, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what we're trying to do is also protect that time ahead of the state fair if they're preparing their animal or project or whatever it is. Is that right?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Craigo, yes, it is.
Okay, further questions? More public testimony?
Chairman Eklund, Boyd Brown, Wyoming School Boards Association. I'm a recovering superintendent from 3 districts across the state of Wyoming, including the largest and the smallest school district. I think that we have a good, tight statute about excusing co-curricularly anybody that goes to the state fair. I am concerned that the language that we're inserting is very nebulous about what we would consider events associated with participation in annual state fair. Again, I think we have lots of activities, even our FFA students, even our athletes, even our band kids do a lot of things outside of the school day to be prepared for, whether it's a competition, concert, or all of those things. And we don't have the ability to excuse those students. Again, I would remind you that we do have high standards. Based on the NAEP assessment, we're one of the best states in the nation with where we go. And so we try to make sure that we keep our students in school as much as possible. And I do believe, much as one of our representatives stated, that this is something best handled at the local school district, and I think that they will do a good job with that. And with that, I would answer questions.
Questions, committee? Thank you, sir. We have some remote testimony, and so if the people online can hear me, please try to limit your discussion. We're on a tight timeline here. First one, whoever you pull up here.
Ms. Rosner?
Okay, Ms. Rosner?
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my name is Addison Rosner. I actually brought this forward to Representative Strzok. This was probably about May that I started reaching out and trying to get this brought forward. So what our initial goal is in 2020, Oklahoma passed a bill that recognized 4-H activities as an extracurricular activity. It caught a lot of headway in the agricultural community and the 4-H community because I think we all see and recognize where there's a big gap for these kids. We talk about state fair a lot, but I don't think people realize that that preparation for state fair, it is not just a week before. It is not just the week of state fair. These kids are putting time in. Most are getting their steers now in January, and a lot of these kids start getting their other livestock come March. Your horse kids are working year round. So this is something that they're investing hours upon hours of time in, between going to clinics, going to different shows throughout the year, going to what we call jackpots, just tons of stuff to try and make sure that they are as prepared as possible for state fair, because that's kind of the cream of the crop for them. And in that process, they're learning a lot of these hands-on leadership activities, a lot of these personal growth and career success aspects that they don't necessarily always get in a classroom. And I feel like we're really, really good at representing those through FFA. Those FFA kids, they are always super gracious about making sure that these are excused absences and that these kids get the opportunity to make up work. But we're lacking on that side for 4-H and FFA. I know on my part, as a kid going through high school, I experienced it several times. I've seen it with my sister. As a leader now, I've seen it with other kids where these teachers just don't understand that going to a 3-day clinic in March, yeah, it's not important to them. And yeah, they're going to be missing a Friday worth of work, but the things these kids are learning and the networking they're making in those 3 days is just irreplaceable. So to just discredit these kids that are already fantastic kids, they normally return back to their communities as great servants, and just putting them at the overall disadvantage of saying you don't necessarily get the opportunity to make up this work, and it's going to be considered an unexcused absence, to me kind of communicates that we feel like that these FBLA, speech and debate, Skills USA, and all these other clubs that we give excused absences for had kind of a hierarchy above those ones that are protecting our Western heritage and agriculture community within our state. So
you do have instances where students have been prevented from making up these absences.
we have. So we come from a much larger school district. We're in Laramie County, of course. So I know probably some of these smaller communities are a little bit more understanding, but I know a 4-H member, she goes to like Denver Stock Show to exhibit her animals, and teachers at times have said, well, we're not going to allow you to make up work for a pig show. That's your decision. That's something that's important to you. So I shouldn't credit you the opportunity to make up work as if you were sick. And I just feel like that's communicating to these kids, like what they're doing is not important, when truly it is making some of the best community leaders and world changers that we have.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, committee? All right. We have someone else online. Can you speak to us and do it briefly if you would, please?
We have Blair Sanchez.
Blair Sanchez. Go ahead when you're ready. We can't hear you, Blair. Can you hear us?
He's on now.
What's that?
He's on now. It took
Okay.
a second for him to.
Are you there, Blair?
Yeah, sorry. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, we can. Go ahead.
I apologize. I'm currently at school. So, personally, I want to share my experience with this. Is I have a heart disease, so I can't participate in the regular sports like football and basketball and volleyball like all the other kids do. And so my chosen sport is showing livestock, judging livestock. And personally, I think that we need to be excused because lots of people, like they excuse the football kids and the band kids for like their certain activities. But I do agree that if certain kids are gone for a certain amount of days, that we need to be held to the exact same standards as sports kids, like having passing grades, making sure our assignments are turned in, letting the actual teachers let us make it up, because I do show and I do judge, like, and that's what I do. And I really do enjoy it, but they excuse these FFA kids for it, but they don't excuse the 4-H kids. So I don't understand how there can't be a 4-H excuse absence and there is an FFA excuse absence. So personally with this, that I do choose showing as this, but we need to be held to the same standards as sports kids and anything else. And I will admit that I will hold myself to the same standard, but that personally having an excuse for 4-H is certainly what we need to do.
Thank you. Any questions? All right. Our next, thank you, Blair. Our next
Crystal,
testify, Crystal Rosner?
she's on.
Okay, Crystal, go ahead when you're ready.
Hi, yes, I am Crystal Rosner. I am actually Addison's mom, and she's the one bringing forth the bill. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Perfect. So I guess my big thing is I've had 4 kiddos go through the school district, Laramie County School District. 3 of them have been livestock kids. One of them is a football kid, and I've seen a huge difference in whether they're excused or not excused, able to make up, not able to make up, that kind of thing. The big thing is I have one left that's going through the school district, and she had just recently went to South Dakota to a show for 3 days. And it was a big, I mean, it was hard to get the work made up. It wasn't excused. So we got the letter because she has missed 5 days or more of school for livestock events that have not been excused. So I guess my thing is the same thing is these kiddos are out there working hard. They're up early in the morning feeding, they're out late. They're learning responsibility. They're learning dedication, hard work, all of this stuff. And I think they should be able to be excused for these things that they're going out of. I know we have a concern of them overusing that, but I think that these livestock kids are pretty good kids. And if they're going to a speech contest for 4-H, I think that's something that is the same as going to a speech contest for speech and debate. And so I think we just need to go back to that and realize what's important to these kiddos and reward them for that. I don't think it's taking a week off to prepare for an animal. I don't think that should be something they're just taking off. But if they're going to a show or they're going to a clinic or they're going to a speech contest, I think we really need to look into those. So I think that's more what Addie was trying to gear this bill towards, is that kind of stuff, not just allowing preparation for an animal. That's done outside of school hours. So that's all I have on that.
Thank you. Questions, committee? All right. Any further public testimony? We have one more.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Laura Pearson again, and members of the committee, sorry. I would support this bill. I am a sheep rancher in Southwest Wyoming. Granted, I wasn't a part of 4-H, but you have to understand that these 4-H children really are the leaders, in our state. And ultimately, I feel like that it is the parents' prerogative to excuse these absences. As long as these kids get their work made up, it shouldn't be the school that's dictating whether the kids have to be in school or not. If they get their work made up, then it should be the parents' right to excuse these absences, and the school should abide by that and allow them the opportunity to work or make up that work. So thank you for taking my testimony. I support this bill.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Okay. Do you have anything further, Tommy?
I do not. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Bill has been moved by Davis, seconded by Slagle. Discussion on the bill. Yes, Representative Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand the importance of 4-H and things in this. My concern with it is when we open up that door to sponsored activities that aren't school sponsored, where do we draw the line? If my trap and skeet club wants to meet and practice, are we going to keep going down that road for excused absences during school? I think I appreciate the intent. I think the language is pretty broad. Events associated with participating, I think that can be manipulated. Of I have to skip school so I can take my lambs for a walk. I just, once we open that door, I think the door is wide open to be manipulated. Those are my concerns with it.
Yes, Representative Alderman.
Mr. Chairman, I look at this as another issue of Western heritage. Our state fair and our kids have been doing it for a very long time. And I believe that we ought to have it to where they can be excused. Thank you.
Representative Schlegel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I look at this as we heard testimony, public testimony, a lot of these events weren't necessarily related to the state fair. And I think maybe the language in the amendment here should be changed to events supported by their parents. Because really, the education of our children is the parents' responsibility. And so if the parents deem an event or activity is right for the children, then I think that's the way it should go. But that would be my comment. So I would move that language there on page 2, line 10. After events, strike associated with participation in annual state fair and put supported by their parents.
Okay, it's been moved. Do we have a second? Second by Winter. Any discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, I think it failed. I think we'll have a raise of hands to be sure. Those in favor, raise your hand. 4, 5, opposed?
You get to make a call, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I'm. So, yes, Representative Davis.
If it'd be all right with the bringer of the bill, would something like students participating in FFA, 4-H members taking part in other competitions throughout the nation, and the annual state fair held under Wyoming statute, would that help?
Mr. Chairman? Yes, and Representative Davis, yes, it would. I do like that.
Okay, that motion, then where do you insert that?
It would be after participating in a new line 8A, between 8A,
Okay.
8 and 9, insert that.
The language again? Huh?
The insert students participating in FFA and 4-H members taking part in other competitions throughout the nation and the annual state fair.
Okay. You got it? Yeah, go ahead one more time, Representative Davis, just so we get.
Line 8, you would have students participating in FFA and 4-H members taking part in other competitions throughout the nation and the annual state fair held under Wyoming statute, blah, blah, blah.
Representative Winter.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question goes to Representative Davis. Would you think it would be good to have reference the approval of the parent in that amendment?
Representative, I think these students wouldn't be participating without the approval of the parents already. I think that would be a given. Somebody has to be banking this operation.
Right. We assume someone else owns the trailer, the shock trailer, the truck. Okay, Representative Banks.
I guess the issue that keeps coming back is FFA is school sponsored. that's the issue I have is once we allow all of these activities that are not school sponsored to just become excused from school, where do we end that? Is the issue I'd have with it.
Representative Craigo, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are schools that don't have FFA, and so 4-H fills in that gap. I can tell you there's a district in my particular, there's a school district in my district back home that does not have that availability, and so 4-H fills in that gap for some of those kids. They still go to the same exact functions, actually, because a lot of the activities that they do are both sponsored by FFA and 4-H, but it's not a school activity. And so that's the little tweak. I mean, the kids that have FFA available, fine, I think that's a great argument, but there are a handful that don't.
Thank you. That helps out a lot.
Okay. Representative Alderman.
I believe that any activity that is sponsored or that the parents agree with should be an excused absence. We have many things like Dalton was talking about a ski club. Or representative was talking about a ski club. And, we don't just learn in school. We learn a lot in our extracurricular activities. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I think we're going down some rabbit holes here.
Yep.
And if we don't keep it on topic, if you like the idea of this bill, you better keep it narrow because A, we're going to miss the floor, and B, we are going to kill the bill because it will get so far out in the weeds that no one will agree to pass it through the House.
Okay, okay. All those in favor of Representative Davis's motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye.
No.
No? Okay, all right. That amendment passes. I'll briefly just say that my grandkids are busy doing this now. They went to South Dakota, they went to the stock show, and it wasn't a problem. The school allowed them to do it, allowed them to take off. Yep, question on the bill. So all those in favor say aye.
Roll call.
Oh, roll call. Okay, we're not in interim. Thank you.
Representative Alderman,
Aye.
Representative Allred,
Aye.
Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Conrad,
No.
Representative Craigo,
Aye.
Representative Davis,
Aye.
Representative Slagle,
Aye.
Representative Winter,
Aye.
Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
8-1, bill passes with amendments.
All right, thank you. My